Welcome to Linguistically Aware, the podcast about all things linguistics. You are listening to CJSW 90.9 FM, broadcasting out of Calgary, Alberta, at the University of Calgary campus radio station, located on Treaty 7 land. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. My name is Brooklyn Shepard, and I'm a PhD student in linguistics at the University of Calgary. In this conversation-based podcast, I sit down with linguists, or language experts, to talk about the ways language and linguistics interacts with our daily lives. In this episode, we have a special double feature for you all. That is, we have not one, but two interviews today, both with linguistics professors that came to the University of Calgary as guest speakers to talk about their research. Our first guest is Dr. Jila Ghomeshi, a professor of linguistics at the University of Manitoba. Our second guest is Dr. Ivona Kucerova. Dr. Kucerova is a professor of linguistics at McMaster University and also leads the syntax lab there. For our first interview, we'll be starting with Dr. Jila Ghomeshi. Dr. Ghomeshi came to the University of Calgary to give us a talk on temporal relations and the syntax of adverbial clauses in Persian. Now, I know that probably sounds like a mouthful right now, but don't worry, we'll get into it. In general, though, Dr. Ghomeshi's research focuses on morphology and syntax, which is essentially the study of words and sentences, respectively. In this chat, I had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Ghomeshi not only about her research, but also about her career in linguistics and how she discovered it. We also talked a little bit about some common myths about the field that she'd like to debunk. Yeah, so could you start by introducing yourself, a little bit about your background in linguistics and how you got to where you are now in your career?
I'm probably at the nearer to the end of my career than the beginning of my career. So thinking back, I was as an undergrad, I took a linguistics course. I loved it. At the time, I switched my major a few times, but I kept taking linguistics. I really, really enjoyed it. And I wouldn't say I was passionate, but I knew I loved being in school, so I kept going. So, my story starts with finding a subject I like and then just sticking with it through an MA. And then I had to be a little bit more intentional and really think about whether I wanted to do a PhD, and I did a PhD. I love syntax. I love the problem-solving aspects of it. I chose to work on the language that my parents speak, which is Persian. So it was a way of connecting to my heritage because I'm not a fluent speaker of Persian. And so that somehow that was meaningful for me to work on a language that was part of my family and I could hear and knew about, but didn't speak fluently. And it's been a very rewarding thing to do. It's kept me connected to my culture and I love it. And so then when I finished, I got a job at the University of Manitoba, and I've been teaching there ever since.
Awesome. Nice. Yeah, I know, I've heard from a lot of linguists that, a lot of us, I think, have started in other programs, and, it's not really one of those degrees that you kind of just go straight from high school or something and into your linguistics degree, because a lot of people don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, first, how you discovered linguistics. What was it that drove you to take a linguistics class? Was it what you expected? And what was your background before that, too? And, were you able to use any of that in your linguistics studies?
I was just, I think it's great when universities have, when the programs are open so that students can sample things from in arts, social sciences, humanities, or even, at my university, there's something called U1 where you can take courses from any faculty in your first year. So I think that I would encourage people to do that. In my case, it's my best friend from high school, who was a year older than me, went to university before me, and I really looked up to her, and she said, "Hey, when you go to university, you should take linguistics. I think you'd really like it." And she was right. So, I'd never heard of it until she suggested it. And I was, I started in psychology. I got really into philosophy. I'd always been good at math. So I thought I was going to be a philosophy math major, and linguistics. I think what I loved was it was what I loved about those other things. Like, I was into the philosophy of language, but I felt like it was getting too abstract, and I was into math, but university math was also getting quite abstract. Somehow linguistics brought together my love of technical, like the part of me that likes doing math with the emphasis on questions, like wanting to seek answers to questions, that I think was drawing me to philosophy. So, for me, I fell into it by accident. And ever since, I think one of the topics of conversation is about with me and my, when I was in grad school and now as a faculty member, is how can we get the word out so that people in high school know about this? They don't literally have to be told by a friend to take it. So yeah, although I have to say, I think, I do think it's really different now from when I went to university. I think we do get undergrads who come in who know what linguistics is. Certainly the undergrads who want to become speech pathologists come in knowing what our program is, knowing it's really useful to take it. But I think there's a better sense of language now. I think there are a lot of kids who know what linguistics is. I that's my sense, but yeah.
You noticed that at the University of Manitoba specifically?
I would say also I just see, I guess I do notice it at University of Manitoba, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, just for context, I also, like many linguists, did not start out in linguistics. I actually started in open studies, just like you, where you can kind of sample different courses. And I did take a linguistics course just kind of on a whim. And then I also loved math. And I think that's really interesting because that's something that I think maybe not a lot of people would expect if they don't know much about linguistics, is that, and it's something that I've heard from a lot of other linguists, is that oh yeah, I loved English or, language classes, and I loved math. So on that note, how would you explain, how does the mathematical kind of thinking factor into your work?
It's funny because when I have students saying, this is like math, it's never a good thing. They're usually saying it because they're feeling fear, dismay, anxiety. So, it's not, I wouldn't say that's a selling point. There are students I know who really get into problem solving. They syntax is diagramming sentences at the sort of intro level. And there are students who come in knowing they love that, knowing they love to figure out structure and it's technical. So you're learning a kind of a formal language. That's the sense in which it's like math, and there are rules, and you have to learn them. But having said that, once I became a linguist and I had to start teaching, when you're a prof, you have to teach outside of your own narrow research interests. So I started looking at other courses that I was interested in developing or taking on. And there are courses I've taught in our program that are much more like what you would do in English or anthropology. I've taught a course on verbal art that doesn't have a shred of resemblance to math. It's I love it. It's about talking about the way we're creative with language, and all the kinds of ways that we play. A lot of it is on verbal play and joking and then really specific genres like auctioneers and laments and so there's a lot that goes in that we cover in verbal art. But I would say that's one of the things I love about this discipline, is that what we touch on is so broad that the mathematical part of it, even though that's what sucked me in and drew me in, is only a small part of it. There's so much more.
Yeah. Yeah, well, on that note, then I have probably a hard question for you. In, like, how would you describe this field in a nutshell to somebody? Like, when people ask you, like, what do you do? And you say linguistics, and they say, what is that? Do you have, like, your elevator pitch version of, here's my field, come join?
Well, I usually, this is going to sound very calculating, but I usually, well, it's not calculating. In my experience, everybody is interested in language because we all use it. So I usually start going through the kinds of things that I teach in Intro to Linguistics. So I'll say, we're interested in how kids acquire language. We're interested in how languages change over time. We're interested in tracing back what the origins of language was. We're interested in how words are formed. We're interested in slang. We're interested in how language reflects identity. And I watch while I'm talking about these things to see which one of these things the person is interested in. Because there's usually something, like they'll sometimes jump in and go, I've always wanted to know about the history of, of language. And then I can talk more about that because I've taught intro and I usually so, it's just a matter of I don't think there's anything I don't think there's anyone that isn't interested in some aspect of language. And what they usually don't know is that there's a field of scholarship and study that's devoted to that thing. And they're always delighted to find that out. It's like, really? You can study that? So yeah, it's really fun. It's fun to talk to people who don't know what linguistics is. It's fun to represent our field and to, I think that's in general, sort of talking about the value of scholarship and ideas. Yeah, I find that fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a really good way to put it, because I have the same issue where I'm like, when people ask me what linguistics is, and I'm like, it's so many things. It's so many things. Like, I don't know, but yeah, that listing things until it sparks something.
Yeah. And then you're like, do I have a class for you?
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to switch a little bit to something more specific to your research, which I know might be hard to talk about for a more general audience, but anyways, so you've just given a talk on adverbial clauses in Persian, and their scrambling properties. Would you be able to provide examples or illustrations to help clarify the concept of scrambling in Persian temporal clauses for our listeners, or even just your research in general? For a more general audience, how would you describe what the talk that you gave today, basically?
I don't think I could describe the whole talk.
Yes.
But I think I think I could describe scrambling. I was thinking how I would. So I think that there are things that come across. Probably everyone's seen a version of some kind of post where people take out the vowels out of a text and you can still make out what it says. So that's a kind of a fun exercise. And I think similarly with, when you think about Yoda speech or something like that, you can mix up the order of words and still know what the sentence is about. So, the thing about Yoda was that people could figure out what he was saying. It's just that the words were in a different order than they're supposed to be. So that's what scrambling is. And we can't do that very much in English, but there are languages that are much freer in being able to put words in different orders and the sentences still mean the same thing. So Persian does this. It can scramble sentences to some extent. It's not unlimited word orders, but within a certain set of parameters, you can say things like the book I bought, or I bought the book, or the book bought me, I. And so that's what scrambling is. And then I was looking specifically at when that happens in clauses that are setting up an event. So they're usually explaining that something happened at the same time as something else. So we use when for that. Like, when I was cooking, the phone rang. Mm-hmm. And so Persian can scramble those clauses and drop the when, but people still understand it to mean that I was doing something when something else happened. So I'm interested in how you get that interpretation when you don't have the word when in your clause. So you get something like, cooking that I did, the phone rang. Mm-hmm. How do you get the right meaning? So, and I think in general, syntax, the kind of syntax I work on is where the puzzles are the most intriguing is where it's clear what something means, but you can't figure out how you get there from just the order of the words that you're given. So there must be something else. There must be some other kind of work we're doing to figure out what something means, not just looking at the string of words that don't tell us all we need to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hidden meanings, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm wondering how you see this research contributing to how this research is significant not only in linguistics but in the broader community as well. How do you see this research being important and meaningful to the world, I guess?
Well, I would say any research that increases our understanding is worthy, even if it doesn't have an immediate application. I mean, I think it's just learning for learning's sake is important about who we are and how we do what we do and about the natural world. But I think it's an interesting moment with language because these kinds of things where we can interpret meanings that aren't there in the string of the word, or the kinds of generalizations that syntacticians have discovered about languages, like about how languages do things, animacy, transitivity, there's all kinds of things that we've figured out are in stark contrast to these language, like these huge language LLMs. What does that stand for? Language learning models? ChatGPT.
Oh, yes. Large language models.
Large.
Yes.
I put the word learning in there, and that was a mistake because they're not learning anything.
No,
and
they're copying.
They're copying, and they mimic what we do with language. And so I think we assume that what we're looking at has been produced in the same way that a human would produce it, but it has no understanding of the kinds of things that syntacticians are investigating. And therefore, our work can predict, we're not quite there yet, but we might be able to predict directions in which language might change, or we can see what the limits are to what you can do with language in terms of producing grammatical sentences. But a machine will never be able to do that. So I think it's an interesting moment to be a linguist because the work we're doing is so different from what the output of AI is.
Yeah.
And if we can highlight that and present it, I think it will speak to what it is to be human.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you bring up ChatGPT because our previous speaker that we had in here for an interview, one thing that she said was that there's been a lot of these models around for a long time, but everybody freaked out with ChatGPT, and she was like, it's because language is such a human thing, and to see something be able to mimic it so well is, scary, interesting, exciting for some, but I thought it was really cool, just sort of the link to it being, because it's language, it makes it feel more human. It makes it feel more like, the robots are taking over kind of thing.
But it's, I guess, the kind of syntax I do has been argued. I mean, one of the reasons why we approach it as such an abstract system is because we're trying to understand the way that kids acquire it. And it's been a commonplace assumption that kids do not acquire it through imitation. Like, that's not what they do, because everything that we observe them doing, they do imitate us in other ways, but acquisition of language is not merely by imitating, by listening and regurgitating. And so we're involved in something that's really different from what someone designing ChatGPT is doing. And the outputs at the moment look similar, but there's going to be some really interesting differences in the way, we innovate with language all the time in a way that a large language model can't.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more question for you, because I know we're just about out of time. So for the last question, I was just wondering if there were any common myths about the field or your research that you would like to debunk. So are there any common myths that you've encountered about what linguists do or what syntacticians do or something like that you'd like to debunk?
Well, I can start with the ones that I think most linguists, and linguistics majors know, which is that if you say you're doing linguistics, people say, "How many languages do you speak?" Or they say, "I better watch how I talk around you." So of those two, I chose to debunk for a while. I was really interested in debunking what I saw as prescriptivist ideas, that there is a right way to speak. Because when we teach linguistics, we contrast that with a descriptive approach to language where, every language variety is of equal value as an object of study and is of equal value as a means of expression. So we don't make judgments, and we can't make judgments about what we study. So I was trying, I actually wrote a little book about that. I think now my next one, which isn't the immediate reaction, but it's something that I encounter a lot, is kind of wanting to push back against the idea that it's actually, I guess, to put it a different way, rather than pushing back against, I would say promoting multilingualism. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around multilingualism and why it's actually good to speak multiple languages, and it's the norm in the world. It's actually odd to be monolingual, and how having many languages is not a threat to any one language. So that's something that's important to me.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you for answering these questions. And thank you for debunking that myth. That was actually one that I haven't heard before. So I think that was really nice.
Thanks. All right. Take care.
Thank you. In this next interview, we have a special guest host sitting down with Dr. Ivona Kucerova. She came to the University of Calgary to give us a talk on the syntax of gender features, which we'll learn more about in this interview. Our special guest host today is Francisco, another PhD student here at U of C, who had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Kucerova and ask her a few questions. Francisco himself also studies syntax, specifically issues related to temporal expressions in languages, and he actually joins me as a guest on a later episode of the show, so stay tuned for that. But for today's episode, he sits down with Dr. Kucerova and asks her not only to explain what gender features in syntax are, but also asks her about her career experience and common myths about what linguists do. Lastly, Ivona brings up the interesting case of ChatGPT and how this technology really caught the world's attention due to the fact that its grasp of language, a fundamental human property, seems almost human in some cases. You're listening to Linguistically Aware, broadcasting on CJSW 90.9 FM on Treaty 7 Land. Listen to this episode or any other episode of Linguistically Aware in full at cjsw.com or Apple Podcasts. Just search Linguistically Aware. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics at the University of Calgary, be sure to visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca.
Hello and welcome to Linguistically Aware, where we talk about how we talk about linguistics. So, today I am with a very special guest, Dr. Ivona Kucerova from McMaster University, who came to the University of Calgary to give a very interesting talk about the syntax of gender features. So, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, Dr. Kucerova, can you start by giving our audience a brief overview of your background and journey in the field of linguistics?
Sure. So when I was an undergrad, I had no idea that linguistics existed. I really wanted to be a translator from Swedish, but it turned out that in Prague, the university where I was applying to, the Swedish program was taking new students only once per 4 years. And apparently the Czech Republic doesn't need that many Swedish translators. And when I graduated, it was 3 more years, so I had to figure out something else. And so I decided to study literature. And I think it was in my third year, my friend Lucie Medová, who has also then turned into a syntactician, and I started working on a critical edition of the only known Czech Baroque novel from the 17th century. And what we needed to do, we had to find everywhere in archives like the remaining copies of this book, and then we had to very painstakingly figure out how we should transcribe everything and figure things out. And somehow throughout the process, we both fell in love with morphology and with different word forms and trying to figure out what actually happened between the 17th century Czech and what we see in a contemporary language. And so both of us wanted to study more of this, but it turned out that there really was no space for us as women at that point. And so we both were like, oh, you know what? We're just going to do something else. And so I ended up going to computer science because they didn't seem to have a problem with my gender. And when I was there, I started working on natural language processing projects. And when I was at it, I realized that actually I do care about language. And I was extremely fortunate to have a tremendous mentor and teacher, someone called Frederick Jelinek, who at that point was a professor of computer science at Johns Hopkins University. And he essentially forced me to apply for linguistics at MIT because he said something like, there's this guy, his name is Chomsky. He's pretty okay. I think you should study with him. And so I sent in my application, and somehow miraculously they actually accepted me. And then I have become a linguist, and there's no looking back.
Okay, that's cool. So, in your recent talk here at the University of Calgary, you discussed 5 features, and you talked about gender features. So, could you briefly explain these concepts to our audience? So, what is a 5 feature?
Well, let's start with what is a feature, right? So we syntacticians assume that what syntax is a structure building module in our language cognition. So we have elements stored in our mental lexicon, we take them out and we start putting them together, and eventually we end up with something which we call words or that we call sentences. Now, at this stage of the language science trajectory, because linguistics is a fairly new discipline, we are still trying to uncover what are the elementary small elements that are combining the structures together. So it's kind of similar to what has happened in biology when people have uncovered molecules and their atoms, and they started looking into a much smaller so I said biology because I was thinking about DNAs, and then I switched to chemistry. But the point is that we know that there must be smaller parts, and we're trying to figure out what those smaller parts are, and we're trying to figure out how these smaller parts are being combined together. Now, 5 features are what we call person, number, and gender, which are features which are realized on pronouns or on nominals. So, for example, when you say her or when you say them, there is a difference in the both in person and in the gender and the corresponding gender marking. And we can use these type of features as a window into understanding better of how syntactic structures are formed.
Okay. And is there any relationship between gender as we talk about gender like as a category of human beings, right? So does this classification of people has something to do with gender when we talk about it as a 5 feature in language?
That's a great question. So the linguists make a difference between so-called grammatical gender and conceptual gender. So grammatical gender is a grammatical property of nominals that does not really mean anything. So in my language, my native language, which is Czech, we use a gender system which is similar to what you see, for example, in French or German, where each object, so not only animate entities, but each object has to be associated with a particular gender. So something like a chair would be feminine, something like a table would be masculine, but there is really no connection between that type of gender and what we call a conceptual gender, which has to do with the self-identification of individuals, which depending on how you understand the notion, so there are two different notions of gender. I'm assuming that when you ask about gender in this sense, you mean gender as a sociological and self-individuating entity, and there's really no direct relationship between conceptual gender and grammatical gender. However, there are languages like English that do not have grammatical gender in the French sense, and where the overt forms of pronouns, they are tracking the self-identification properties of individuals. And so, for example, when we're talking about a single they for individuals that do not want to associate with binary gender distinctions, we see a particular usage of conceptual gender, which by using a form that is not associated with a specified gender, which is either feminine or masculine, allows the individual to express the non-commitment to the binary distinction.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thank you. So you also work in projects supporting language reclamation efforts in local indigenous communities, right? Can you tell us more about these projects? How does your theoretical research in syntax intersect with your applied projects in language reclamation?
I have been really fortunate. In McMaster University is located very close to the Six Nations of the Grand River, and the university has been trying now for a while to repair what used to be pretty fraught relationships between academics and the indigenous communities. And I have somewhat indirectly became involved in some of these efforts. And so I have my primary collaboration has been with community-based language programs that are very successfully raising advanced, fluent speakers of Haudenosaunee languages. So these programs are intensive immersion programs that typically take to one of the programs where we have 3 years program, and they have managed to bring young adults from their community to the level of speaking that allows them to start raising children in their native languages, which is absolutely amazing. And so we see like a genuine reclamation happening in real time. We see a genuine resurgence of indigeneity through languages. And I have been lucky enough to be introduced to some people and eventually like get enough trust that they wanted to work with me. And so we've been primarily doing supporting works for them where we're kind of helping with the lack of organizational structures, because lots of these programs and efforts, like, they really need to be based in community, and the languages have to be learned in their community. So in the process, these students can also learn about their culture, learn more about the connection between language and the values of the community, and so on. But at the same time, to actually create a functional language immersion programs is a really, really complex and expensive enterprise, because you have to, and languages are different, so you have to create educational resources, you have to train your teachers, you have to find funding for students, and so on and so on. And so we're kind of trying to use the fact that the university has a well-established organizational structures, that to use that to support individual communities to be able to do their work, but at the same time to make it possible for them to connect with other communities and learn from them, and to kind of acquire best possible practices for their programs, so they would be able to improve their programs, to get more students through the programs, and so on. So that in and of itself does not really require any linguistics. So one thing that we're also trying to do, we're trying to help with the efficacy of the programs by helping them to figure out for a curriculum, like, a more complex structural issues and how to best teach certain type of phenomena. So that's one part. The other thing is that we're currently exploring is whether we can help with the fact that the speakers, even though they're fluent, they are ultimately second language speakers, which manifests itself in their pronunciation. So they're very much, you can hear that they actually are originally English speakers or French speakers. And that is a problem because, for example, the elders do not recognize them necessarily as good speakers as they should be. So we're also trying to figure out whether we can create something like phonetics clinics for the programs.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So, to finish this conversation, is there any myth about language or linguistics that you would like to debunk for our listeners?
Oh, yeah, I so much hope you wouldn't ask me this question. I don't know, because I don't know what people actually think about linguistics. I think sometimes people ask you how many languages you speak, but I'm more worried about that. Not worried, but I think most like a general audience public imagines under linguistics a field that more corresponds to philology, like people who are writing grammars, and they do not necessarily know, and ultimately, like, that's our fault because we are not talking enough about our research in a public space, that we are a scientific discipline which is part of cognitive sciences. And so I think I would like to see a world where kind of everyone in high school knows that there's this exciting field where people can learn about brains and human cognition and can learn about, from a scientific point of view, more about this amazing property that we call language, which is really what makes humans humans. And one thing that I also, like, I wish people thought about a little bit more and more carefully is that if you think now, like, all the debates around ChatGPT and artificial intelligence and these language models, I am genuinely convinced that if OpenAI first came up with a system that was about visuals and not about language, people would have been much less interested and much less worried. Because what happened in the domain of artificial intelligence is suddenly there are machines that seem to be doing something which we associate with a very fundamental human property. And the fact that there's so little knowledge about language as a part of human cognition ultimately leads to, like, lots of misunderstandings about what these systems actually can do, and make it so difficult to have a substantial, meaningful debate about what the impact of these new technologies on the society is and might be.
Okay, thank you. I really love that perspective on linguistics as a science. As a linguistic student myself, I really like the way you put it. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to welcome you here at the University of Calgary to know more about your perspective on language and on the science of language. And this is your home. We are really happy to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco. It's been my pleasure, and I very much enjoyed meeting you and the other students. I have learned a lot from you, and I can tell how excited you are about your field and how deeply you care both about the discipline and the university and your department. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for having listening to our podcast today, Linguistically Aware, which is brought to you by A Higher Clause, the Graduate Students Association of Linguistics at the University of Calgary.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Linguistically Aware. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the fascinating world of linguistics. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics, please visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. Until next time, keep exploring the beauty of language.